Well, in our series on vision of gather, grow, and go, we're back once again to the theme of gathering and what that looks like for us. And I want to talk about gathering in the context of the largest gathering in Jesus' ministry. That's the feeding of the 5,000. Maybe some of you are familiar with this scene, this occasion. And I wanted to talk about this miraculous feeding of the 5,000 because, well, sometimes when we look at the miracles of Jesus, we can kind of miss the point. We think of it as this really amazing magic trick. Wow, look what Jesus was able to do. But when Jesus fed the 5,000, he was actually teaching something about us. He was teaching us about our appetites. He was teaching us about how he is the one who's able to feed. He shows us his heart for his people. And so as we gather here today, let us hear and be challenged by what Jesus does when people gather before him. So fall with me, if you will, in Mark 6, verses 30 through 44. See this scene here in Mark 6, verse 30. It says, "The apostles returned to Jesus and told him all that they had done and taught. And he said to them, 'Come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest a while.' For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. And they went away in the boat to a desolate place by themselves. Now many saw them going and recognized them, and they ran there on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. And when he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. And when it grew late, his disciples came to him and said, 'This is a desolate place, and the hour is very late. Send them away to go into the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves who are hungry.'" Maybe there was a time when you were fasting and you felt your stomach just in knots over hunger. Yeah, hunger has a way of changing us, does it not? Hunger is a basic feeling that can drive us. It can make us feel exhausted and sleepy, right? It can make us angry or hangry, really. But while we're talking still about rest, this is something we should really consider. How do you rest? How should we seek rest? How do we go about finding that? I ask that because when you are hungry for rest, maybe you're hungry for rest even right now, how are you feeding yourself? That is, how do you restore your strength? How do you find restoration? What's the antidote for rest for you? How do you, get your rest back up? I mean, for introverts here, you'd probably say, I just need time alone. I don't have to talk to anyone. I can just sit with my thoughts for a bit, and then I can get out and be with people. This past year has been a big lesson in introverted rest, I think. You've kind of figured out how to entertain yourself when you're on your own. But you've probably also encountered in this past year ways of rest that actually aren't actually that restorative to your energy. Ways of rest that are actually more exhausting, more draining. It doesn't actually restore you. Oftentimes when we have free time, it might actually be more akin to eating empty calories, right? Of just scrolling and scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. And you're like, well, this is free time. I've got this time. And eventually you put your phone down and you actually feel like worse than you did before. It's kind of just junk food of the way we use our time. It doesn't actually fill us back up. It actually just leaves us more hungry for rest, what that blue screen does to us. It actually just drains us more. We need to consider how to intentionally seek rest. How, if we're hungry to rest, how do we actually become restored? You see, what Jesus invites the disciples to do is gather to him. To truly find our souls restored is to take time with him. Time away in prayer, just stillness before God, that itself is a beautifully restful opportunity. And consider how necessary intentional retreat time is. Something I try to do, at least I'm going to try to do more often annually, is just take myself away for a day to just journal and pray. A time away where I'm not working, but I am just sitting and dwelling before God, not thinking of the other distractions that come in my inbox. That's true, fulfilling rest, because it's only in the presence of Christ that we find our souls fed, find our souls really restored. And that means a challenge then. When we think about our free time, when we think about the time that we have to rest, are there things maybe we need to say no to? Are there things that we might have to say, this is a good thing in itself, but maybe not right now, because maybe that thing actually won't provide me the rest I need and I'm hungry for right now? What are things I do need to say yes to that I haven't been? Something for us to consider here as we think about the time we have for rest, think about the time when we are hungry for it. But as I said, this time for the disciples is cut short by people who are surrounding Christ because they are hungry for something else. And they are hungry for guidance for the true shepherd. And this passage, I actually picked this passage for this morning's sermon because it's one of my favorite descriptions of the heart of Jesus. You see, he looks at this crowd of 5,000 people, and Jesus looks out at them, and how does he see this group? In verse 34, it says he looks on them with compassion because they were like sheep without a shepherd. He looks at this group of people, and he immediately perceives their need. He knows their neediness. He knows they're hungry for someone to guide them, to teach them. He doesn't just see a crowd of people. He sees lost people who need the good shepherd, who need direction, who need truth. The vision that Jesus has is that he knows they need the good shepherd. He doesn't wish to send them away. He knows what they need, and they might not even all be seeking Jesus for the right reasons. They might not be seeking him for the right reasons, but he knows he can give them true guidance. Think about this picture of a sheep without a shepherd. A sheep without a shepherd is actually in quite grave danger. Perhaps you've seen this video that was, circulating, I think, the past year or so, of this wild sheep. You know what a wild sheep looks like? It looks like a sheep I believe they shored off about 75 pounds of overgrown wool. That is a sheep without a shepherd, who doesn't even know the problems it's facing, as all that wool attracts dirt and can attract infection and disease because it's not clean. Can you imagine wearing that much wool in the summer right now? That sheep's not able to regulate its body temperature, and it's in danger of overheating and dying. His sheep was found in the Australian area, and they brought it in, and happy ending, don't worry. They removed the excess wool, and that nice little sheep is doing much better now. It is the same sheep, according to the article. I didn't just put up two different pictures of sheep. That one is okay. But you see what happens when we are without our good shepherd. We might not even know what the problem is. I don't think that sheep was walking around in Australia saying, I think I need to get get a haircut. I had no idea. It just felt, I'm feeling really gross and really sweaty right now. I don't know what the problem is. That's so often how we are. We don't know what we need. We don't know what the solution is. But these people here are drawing to Christ because they know they need something. And I have a sense that's why many of you are here this morning. Maybe many of you are here because you know you need Jesus, but you don't know how. I think that's why we gather back again and again, because so often we don't know what we need from Christ. We just know that we need him. We are a sheep without a shepherd. And Jesus is that true shepherd. And the beautiful thing about this perspective that Jesus has is compassion. As we see that picture of the sheep, I'm sure many of your hearts going to go out to it like, oh, that poor thing. I hope he's okay. That's what Christ sees you when he sees how lost you're feeling. The disciples don't have that immediate instinct. And we don't always have that immediate instinct either. And I can really appreciate that Jesus takes this time, not only to do a miracle, but he also takes this time to teach his disciples about those who hunger for his guidance. You see, it's getting late, and the disciples come up and say, Jesus, we have to end the lesson now. It's dinner time, the people are going to get hungry, and there's no way here to get food. There's just a bunch of grass. So we need to let's end this early, send them, they need to walk home and get food. Jesus takes the moment and teaches them, and he doesn't just say, don't you know who I am? I can just make food from rocks if I wanted, because I am the Lord. I can do this. He doesn't just say that. He says, okay, you give them something to eat. He's starting to be a little bit, speaking in riddles here, trying to get them to understand something. He's first showing his disciples that they need to have a certain accountability and responsibility here, that it is their role to think of what these people need, even though they are missing the point. He's training them right now, and he wants them to have his vision of people as sheep without a shepherd. Because their response is, let's just send them away for food. They'll figure it out. But think about where they are. They have to walk all the way out back. They've come from miles into this desolate place, and they'd have to come all the way back. They're in a food desert, as it were. I was actually talking with someone last week about this very thing, that you can be in a densely populated city. This person was on a work trip, and after a conference meeting, they got out and they're like, well, I need to go find some food. I just want like some fresh fruit, okay? But where he was in the city, you could only get maybe fast food, and there were just businesses and places. The only way he could get to a place with a grocery store was by getting in a car and crossing a bridge. The food desert. There's no place to get food, even in that city. Kind of like where they are now. There's no place for them to get food. They're hungry. But the disciples are only thinking about their bodily hunger. That's why I want us to think about this passage more than just food. This is about a spiritual hunger that these people have. They have a spiritual need. And we are to look at others in their spiritual need with a kind of compassion. How do we sometimes then miss the point when we see gatherings of people? What I mean by that is you might look at another gathering of people, another group of people, and not recognize their need. We so quickly gather against one another, draw lines, and see another group of people that might irritate you, another faction, another party, and think their views just don't make sense to you. You're just tired of hearing their opinions because their opinions are just so wrong and they miss the point, and you just wish they would go away. You just shake your head at them. But what would it mean to see the areas that they need a shepherd too? Where their desires, their views on things are misguided because they need the love of Christ to guide them in truth and in compassion. How can you see their need and their hunger for guidance? Maybe they have become misguided, but how can you look at them with compassion? That's what Jesus is teaching his disciples here, to look at others with compassion. Let's think about the spiritual need of others and how we can send them to the Good Shepherd. Here's the other thing that Jesus wants the disciples to see. He wants them to confess they can't feed the people themselves. Because Jesus says, okay, you give them something to eat. And their response is, well, that's financially impossible. It's going to cost 200 denarii to feed everyone. Now, a denarius was a day's wage for a laborer. So 200 days' wage. I mean, essentially they're saying it would cost over half my annual salary to feed 5,000 people. I can't do that. I mean, let's put that in perspective here of how much that would cost to feed $5,000. Even today. Think if you could feed 5,000 people you got a deal, right? And it was $5 a head. That would be $25,000. If you could feed people then for $10 a head, that's $50,000. This is not something they can just, run out to the local McDonald's and just get some burgers and just throwing them out to 5,000 people. It's not going to work that way. Jesus is making them see, Jesus, we can't do this. We can't feed them. And that is the whole point of this passage where it comes to, is that Jesus is alone the one who can perform the real miracle. Jesus is the one who can give us sustenance, feeding us. Not just bodily, but feeding us in his grace. We need to look to him when we gather to feed us. Let's look at that last part then of how he feeds those who hunger to be sustained by him, those who hunger for his sustenance. You see, the power of Jesus is not that he's got these culinary superpowers. That's not the point here. What we take away is that when we gather before Jesus, he actually fills us with his grace. You see, Mark here, what's fascinating in this passage and the way it's written is that Mark always writes with a kind of immediacy, and he writes with a speed. He writes at a fast clip. Mark's, in his gospel, his favorite phrase is, and immediately, and immediately, and immediately. He just moves through the text. But then when he gives a lot of details, he is slowing down. He's not getting immediate anymore. He's giving us these details, and we see that happen here. As Jesus patiently asks them several questions, he commands the people to sit down, and the people sit down. He brings the bread, and he breaks it, and he blesses it. All these details are for us to see what is going on here. The other thing, one of the details that we see again and again and again is reinforcing the 5 loaves and 2 fish. I mean, that's only enough for about 5 people, right? That's not enough for 5,000. And Mark continually wants us to see, listen, it was 5 loaves and 2 fish. That's all we had. You see, some people who try to explain away the miracles of the Bible, they really stretch things at certain points. Some who would say Jesus wasn't doing anything miraculous would say that, well, people were just inspired by generosity and people felt like sharing their lunches. Mark says, no, all that was there was 5 loaves and 2 fish, again and again, showing us that that's all Jesus had to work with was 5 loaves and 2 fish. What does that tell us about what it means when we gather before Jesus? What does that tell us about how Jesus feeds you? The miracle here is that Jesus sustains you not depending on a wealth of resources. Jesus sustains us with whatever is there. This is more than just food, but he fills our hungry souls with rest and guidance. He's always the one who will sustain us. When we expect Jesus to be able to answer prayer, yes, but do you expect him to answer prayers with few resources? Do you expect him, that's the amazing part, to use simple, humble means, like with whatever you have to feed his people? Because Mark wants us to know that Jesus just used 5 loaves and 2 fish to feed 5,000 people. Do you look at yourself and look at what you have and the resources you have and the gifts you have, and do you feel like all you have is 5 loaves and 2 fish? Feeling like, Jesus, what are you going to do with me because I'm too small? I lack age. I lack experience. I lack wisdom. I lack wealth. I don't have connections. Lord, how are you going to use me? I just got 5 loaves and 2 fish. The whole point here is that how does God feed others? He feeds us with humble, simple, ordinary means. That Jesus is the one who will give you sustenance, not you. You may think even about our gathering here. You may think about harvest as a small offering. What power, what opportunity does harvest have to grow the kingdom of God? What influence do we really have in the city of Madison? Can we really change anything? And in many ways, we're right. I can't change much. We're not going to just feed the city of Madison true teaching of Christ just on our own work. It's something that Jesus does by his power and his Spirit moving. And the real miracle going on is that he's going to use people like you, he's going to use people like me to do that to grow his people. That's the miracle of what's going on this morning when we're gathering. That in the seemingly small, insignificant offering of our songs, our prayers, our fellowship, especially the small offering of me reading and preaching God's word, all these are things that God uses to feed us. These are things that God uses to fill us up in his grace. You may be feeling like you're in a spiritual desert at the moment, like there was no way to grow, there's no way to be sustained. But remember how beautifully and surprisingly God fills up the stomachs of his people. If he can do that with 5,000 people with a little bread and a little fish, how much more is he going to fill up your heart and your soul with his grace? That's another thing. Let's not miss that beauty, that people are said to be full and there's plenty of things left over. He was able to divide. It's not that somehow he was able to divide the food crumb by crumb and everyone just got a little bit of taste, but he was actually able to fill them up to all they needed. Understand that in the death, the resurrection of Jesus Christ, he has filled you up with all that you need, more than you could ever need. That's what the grace of God looks like. It's overfilling, it's overflowing. And so as we gather here this morning, know that Christ is feeding you with exactly what you need for the day. This gathering is a refueling station, a place to rest, a place to refocus on who actually sustains us. It's a time where we are reminding each other where we're headed. We're headed for the new heavens and new earth where we will be continuously filled up by the love and goodness, the teaching of Christ. We'll be with him, our hearts will be full. And so right now, we are training appetites for one another. We're training each other to find sustenance and find grace only in Jesus Christ. Now, as we think about appetites then, and I think again about when I go out to eat, I really do try to avoid getting overstuffed because I really hate that feeling of just being way too full. And that means, you have to monitor how much you're having. And that's a hard thing to do if you've ever, for example, eaten at a Brazilian steakhouse. I don't know if you know those places that people where they walk around with just skewers of meat and several different kinds of meat, and you just have a little sign that says, yes, put more meat on my plate. And then you can turn it over and say, I don't want meat, and then they ignore that and they still put meat on your plate. I always found that little thing is useless. They're still going to give me meat. And there's a trick that they have there, though. Because it's all you can eat, but the meat's the most expensive thing that they have. And so to make sure you don't eat too much, they have a really nice salad bar. It's not just, green salad. It's a lot of really good sides and things. The idea is that you're fill up on that so you're not too hungry for all of their meat. So when I go, I just try to make sure to ignore that temptation of the other good foods on the side so I can just have my carnivorous meal. So I have an appetite ready for the meat. As you come and gather here this morning, how hungry are you for Christ? How hungry are you for the grace of Christ? Or have you been filled up this week by other things, by other appetites, by other passions? You realize in this world there's so much that competes for our appetite. We can be so filled up that we don't leave any room for the grace of Christ. And Jesus knowingly told us that man shall not live on bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. Do we hunger for the word of God like that? How do we hunger for that? How do we feast on that? Because Jesus is the bread of life. And we know that when we feed on him, we will not hunger, we will not thirst again. And again, the real miracle going on is that every week we come here, when we gather, and God gives us ordinary means of grace. He feeds us in prayer. He feeds us in our rest today. He feeds us as we hear his word. He feeds us spiritually as we eat of the Lord's Supper. He has provided ways for us to be filled by his grace. And that is itself a miracle. And so let's never lose our hunger or our appetite for those things. Let us hunger for Christ as we gather here. Let's pray.